last week we were debating about all-time greats and the ranking of certain fighters, and Usyk obviously was the centre of conversation for that. And Duke McKenzie, I think, kind of stopped us in his track with his assessment. Let's have a little listen to what Duke said.
Yeah, he deserves to be in the all-time top 20. We don't know where he fits in that top 20. Because, like you said, I think...
Heavyweights or...
Yeah, heavyweights. Not
20?
20? Top 20.
There's 19 heavyweights better than Usyk.
In my opinion.
Wow.
If we're looking back into the 70s and the 80s, the 90s, you look back at those kind of fighters, your Frasers, your Formers, your Alis, you know, then you got your Lennox Lewis, your Tysons, your Riddick Bowes, your Evander Holyfields. You know what I mean? There's a lot of guys that were given, I think, Usyk a lot of trouble that aren't the real big names, like a Ray Mercer. I think Ray Mercer would give Usyk a lot of problems.
David Tua
would give him...
But Usyk equally would give them fits. His southpaw stance and movement, and those heavyweights back in the day, as much as we like to look at them, they weren't big, you know.
Yeah, but
they weren't big. They weren't big as we think they were.
Carlotta was huge.
Yeah, they were
Witherspoon
combination punches, AD. They were combination punches. They were
Riddick
athletes.
was huge.
They were proper athletes.
Yeah, but someone like Joe Frazier, who was relentless, but was a little bit predictable. And you know, he'll come forward doing this. Like someone like Usyk, who had that skill set and you know, you're talking about size and all that. You go, you got to put Usyk a massive favourite over Frazier.
But the power that Frazier could
yeah, but could he land it?
Well, listen, he decked Muhammad Ali, right? The greatest of them all.
Yeah, I know.
The greatest mover and shaker of them all. And then look what George Foreman did to Joe Frazier.
Don't you think that Usyk puts his name in that argument when you're talking about even with the Muhammad Ali's because of what he's done?
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's in the top 20. You got
Right, listening to that and replaying it in my mind, I mean, obviously there were names thrown in there like Ray Mercer and David Tua. We were talking about a list of all-time greats, and whilst they were good heavyweights at the time, I thought it was a strange little departure, and I will always listen to Duke. It also was evident to me that you and Addy weren't necessarily concurring with Duke's point of view. What, in your mind, makes an all-time great?
Well, that's it. What defines an all-time great is you go, for me, it's who they've got in their era and who they beat in that era. And, you know, Oleksandr Usyk, OK, he's had 8 fights as a heavyweight or whatever, but he's gone through them all twice, the best of this modern era. So that will put him down as... He'll go down as an all-time great, because when you do the comparisons, and we've done this with Oleksandr Usyk, not only that he's cleaned up the division and done it twice, but you look at, and there's probably still more to go. You know, he's another 2 fights left in him. You look at that and you compare and you go back. Like, I was looking at some stats today. Well, Muhammad Ali, when you're talking about Muhammad Ali being the greatest, which he is, and he rightly deserves that with the resume that he had back in his day, Muhammad Ali, when he come back and boxed Floyd Patterson after his first defeat in 1972, I checked out his weight. He was 13 stone 4, right? So when you're doing that and you're weighing up, you're going, oh, would you... It's sort of...
186 pounds?
188 pounds. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that the heavyweights have grown so much, sports science, people have got faster, like, stronger.
Is an all-time great...
So an all-time great is defined by who is around in their era and who they beat.
Is it different for an all-time great based upon weight class? Because we are confining our all-time great analysis to obviously the conversation at hand, which was the heavyweight division. But an all-time great... Is it different in different divisions? Because I look across the middleweight division, look at Marvellous Marvin Hagler, look at Tommy Hearns, look at Sugar Ray Leonard, then look at Roberto Duran, and I think all of them are all-time greats, but all of the same era.
What defines an all-time great for you?
I think it's unique to the individual. I mean, I think if you look at the records of fighters, you've got to talk about people like Hagler, who fought everybody, beat everybody, and obviously there's contentious arguments about how Sugar Ray Leonard fights, and so on and so forth. I think we are judged, or we judge all-time greats by what we grew up watching at times. And, of course, things change when you're younger and you view the world in a certain way. I grew up watching Lloyd Honeyghan fight Donald Curry when I was 17, 18 years of age. I went over to Atlantic City to watch that fight and watch Don Curry get broken down. At the time, he was considered to be the pound-for-pound great fighter. I remember watching, Mike Tyson knock out Michael Spinks. And, of course, you compartmentalise it to a part of his career. You go, Tyson demolishes Berbick. He goes in and demolishes Spinks. He has a bit less of a demolishing of James Bone Crusher Smith, but notwithstanding, still wins it. He knocks out Tony Tucker. He knocks out Tony Tubbs. Right?
Do you think that people...
But then you go and say that Tyson after that, which comes back and gets beat by Buster Douglas, comes out of prison, beats whoever he beats, Buster Mathis Jr. or whatever it was, and you think that's not the same Tyson I looked at, but it's the overall package of Tyson.
Yeah.
For me, he makes him an all-time great. But that period of 1986 to 1990, and then you get Ali, who goes from winning the Olympics to being this phenomenal heavyweight that changed the way heavyweights moved, to beating the big ugly bear in Sonny Liston, to coming back after being stripped of his belts because of his religious beliefs against the circumstances in the Vietnam War, wouldn't take the draft, comes back and fights these fights against Joe Frazier, against George Foreman, these battles that we see and saw, Kenny Norton, Ernie Shavers, all these different fights. And that to me is... Do you
think we're guilty, Simon, of like when a fighter's in his current time, we're always guilty of saying we compare them with fighters of past, and it needs time just to manifest. We go, where you look back in 10 years' time, I appreciate Lennox Lewis much more now than when he was actually boxing in the 90s, because we always make those comparisons.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like even with like someone, let's move on to a fight that's coming up. When you go, Terence Crawford is going in against Canelo, but you look at Terence Crawford, and I've always said, I look at Terence Crawford and I go, I think he would have lived in any era with like Sugar Ray Leonard, when you talk going back to those days, and even with like
but I think is it
Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran, all those sort of guys, you can see him sort of, and he'll go down as one of the all-time greats if it comes through against Canelo.
I think we are more guilty in the media of doing that. I don't think people sit around. I think you probably sit around and when you're not on a television screen or on a radio show saying who was your all-time great. You enjoy what you enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think there's a propensity now to compare and contrast because it creates media content. So I think you enjoy them. I think what we don't do enough in life is appreciate the moments.
Yeah.
You've got an elite heavyweight now in Oleksandr Usyk. You've got an elite super middleweight in Canelo Alvarez. You've got an elite
welterweight in Bud Crawford.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a whole raft. You've got elite light heavyweights in Beterbiev and Bivol. You are living in a unique era now, and boxing across the weight classes is getting so much more exposure that it gives you a far range of opportunities. But one of the things I wanted to do in this section was talk about Usyk in the circumstances of the fights that he could have had, despite the fact I've just said, do we really sit around and do this in our lives? We'll do it for the media. We'll do it now. You've got him against some of the best 5 heavyweights and imagining how he would go. So I've picked out what I consider to be, in the last 30 or 40 years, the 5 meaningful heavyweights. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone I haven't included in this. So I've got Usyk versus Larry Holmes, the Eastern Assassin, somebody that followed on from the Muhammad Ali era, but never gets the credit that he deserves. Probably got a lot of people not warming to him because he was the one that dealt with Muhammad Ali and in a way that people wouldn't want to have seen happen. How would you have thought Usyk would have gone against Larry Holmes?
See, that is such a tough call because Larry Holmes is, for me, one of the greatest never to have got the recognition because of what happened with Muhammad Ali, the way that he pounded him in that fight. Yeah. And Ali, was the greatest at the time, and he was the much-loved fighter. And I think that Larry always lived in his shadow, but Larry is probably one of the best fighters that doesn't get recognised.
So how would you think Usyk would go against him?
He's a tough fight, Larry Holmes, and it's a really tough call because Larry Holmes is the best jab in the business.
So, answer it.
It's a tough one to call, that one. Can we move on?
Right, OK, that's not helpful.
No, I'll come back to that one, but it's a very tough one to call.
Oleksandr Usyk versus Dr. Steelhammer, Vladimir Klitschko.
I think that Usyk wins. I think the mobility of Usyk would win that fight against Klitschko, even in his prime. What about you?
Yes, I agree with that, absolutely.
Larry Holmes?
I think Holmes would win that fight. I think for so many different reasons, but Holmes' jab was just a phenomenal weapon.
Yeah.
And it did so much damage to big heavyweights during that period. And I just think Holmes, like you said, was such an underrated fighter, an under-rewarded fighter in terms of the pantheon of fighters that are judged in certain ways. And I think it must be because of the Ali association. Usyk versus Lennox Lewis. I made the case the other day, and people will parody it and say, nothing. I think Lennox Lewis is an elite heavyweight. Clearly, he was an elite heavyweight.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time watching him versus Hazim Rahman, see him against Michael Grant, see him against Evander Holyfield in both Madison Square Garden and Los Angeles, and other fights. I think that Lewis would have dealt with Oleksandr Usyk. I don't think people agreed with me last week. Where were you on that?
I'll sort of go with you with that with Lennox Lewis. I think the only 2 defeats he had against Rahman and Oliver McCall, he reversed. Yep. So, he will go down as one of the greatest to ever do it. And I think Lewis in his prime was
they were sloppy defeats,
an incredible fighter. They were sloppy defeats, and there was reasons behind those defeats.
Filming Ocean's 11 for
absolutely.
Hazim first fight.
So Lennox for me sort of fits in the top 3 all time. Like there's that argument with him. So yeah, Lennox Lewis.
Oleksandr Usyk versus Mike Tyson, baddest man on the planet once upon a time.
That's what I'm saying. Again, you look back now.
Depends which version of it.
So, Mike Tyson from when he was beat Trevor Berbick.
86 to 90. Let's have Oleksandr Usyk. Let's have 2 versions of Oleksandr Usyk for the purpose of this discussion. Usyk versus Tyson, 86 to 90, and Usyk versus Tyson post Buster Douglas, post Don King.
Usyk versus Tyson post Buster Douglas. He wins that fight.
Usyk,
But the one that Mike Tyson, the 20-year-old Mike Tyson that beat Trevor Berbick and Tyrell Biggs and all those sort of fighters, and Michael Spinks, you got to go Mike Tyson.
Yeah. Last one in our sort of land of fantasy, Usyk versus the greatest, Muhammad Ali.
You can't go against the greatest. I think Muhammad Ali, in his prime, was untouchable. And I would have to go with Muhammad Ali. I think it'd be crazy not to. You know, but what we're saying, and I'm glad you've done this debate, actually, because...
Are you?
Actually, I am. Yeah.
Well, you can thank the producer for doing it, because I'd rather tie my tongue to the back of a bus than do this.
But this is the conversation I was having on the show last week. I go, Oleksandr Usyk has now put his name in there for that argument, which is the great thing, because we'll all have an opinion on who goes there, but... What Usyk has done now is stamped his name in that conversation, and that will always be in there. And everyone's going to have an opinion on the way that the fights would go. But I'm just glad his name is there.
And deservedly so. And, no doubt it won't be long before he gets inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame at some point. Right, that's it for episode 132 of Talk Boxing. From myself and Spencer Oliver, we'll look forward to seeing you this time next week.